Okay, so very happy to have you, Maren, on PCM4U channel. Maren Koban, you're the Director of Global Regulatory and Scientific Policy at Merck, pharma company, well-known pharma company. And you're very involved in cross-border access to clinical trial for patients. So my first question to you would be, what is your background, or what in your work brought you to this topic of cross-border access to clinical trials?
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here. First of all, really happy to talk about this topic. Well, what brought me to kind of get involved in cross-border access to clinical trials? I've been working in the field of regulatory for close to 20 years, and I've been in development, and I've been guiding drug development programs from phase 0 to phase 3. And one of the key topics is kind of like, how can we recruit patients into clinical studies? Obviously speed is of essence, also to bring these new innovative medicines when they show benefit to patients earlier. And it is really, I've been responsible for global development. So comparing the US, for example, and Europe, because of the national, regional requirements for approval of clinical trials from regulators as well as ethical committees, is very burdensome. It's a long, long process, which makes Europe not a very attractive place for clinical trials. And even worse, it does not allow, in this case, then patients in Europe to get access to these innovative drugs that could, in certain situations where we really have no other hope, help them possibly. And that's really kind of like motivated me to get involved in this initiative that I heard about, UXCT, which is aiming to facilitate cross-border access to clinical trials, also in countries where the trial is not approved, because, as I said, a very long process and administrative burden. Because I felt it was really important for me, one of the most exciting initiatives that I've been involved in, because I believe it's important for European patients, for example, in Malta, to be able to participate in a trial that runs, for example, in Italy, because Italy just is a bigger country with possibly more specialists in a particular indication.
It's good that you explain a little bit what are globally the process to approve a clinical trial in each country and why it is needed to have it in each country.
Yes, okay, thank you. That's a very interesting question. So in Europe, as you know, even within the EU, we are 27 countries. And because of the continued coexistence of EU law and national law, we are at this moment of time obliged to obtain approval of a particular clinical trial from regulatory authorities as well as from ethical committee in each of the countries that we wish, or anybody wishes to run a trial in. That is, as said, it takes a lot of time. So essentially, it also slows down the development of new drugs and then market access, of course. But it also kind of like leads to the fact that usually only a few countries are being selected to participate in the clinical trial. And I think that's even more pronounced for trials run by academia as compared to industry. Our large trials, which are for advanced product developments, usually run in 3 to 4 to 5 countries, which then are selected based on all sorts of criteria, lengthy process, but it kind of like hinders patients from countries where this trial is not running to participate in this trial. And I think that needs to be changed. So if you, for example, compare this to a situation in the US and some other large countries, obviously it's one federal kind of like government, and you ask for one approval of the trial by the US FDA, and there's one central ethics committee. So that's much faster. And in this situation, all the US patients could, participate in the trial. That's not the case in Europe. And I think that's important to obtain this for our patients here as well.
Yeah, clearly that illustrates how it's important to support cross-border access, or at least an organization that could allow that, even either at the clinical trial level, so approval across countries, or at the patient level. So in clinical trials in oncology, at least, clearly are dedicated to most often to indication, cancer types or diseases, specific diseases. So are there diseases or clinical indication where cross-border access to clinical trial are most important?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I believe that it's, obviously we're looking more into targeted medicines. And, in earlier years, we were talking about breast cancer or lung cancer. And now we know they have many, many molecular subtypes. And you test patients with the aim for them to benefit most. However, this also means that the number of patients that are kind of like likely to respond or to a particular medicine is slimming down. So we're talking about rare indications more and more so, particularly in oncology, but also outside of oncology. And trials for rare indications, I think, are in particular need for cross-border access to clinical trial, as well as trials in pediatric indications. Like children kind of like should also have preferred access to innovative medicines if that is the only one thing that possibly might help them.
Yeah, you're right. And given the point you raised about the difference between pharma company promoted clinical trials that run in not so much countries and academic clinical trials that could run in more countries, such as PCM4U, clearly there's a point here because so pharma companies are interested in rare disease, but sometimes in rare disease there are more academic clinical trials, and so it would require there more fluidity in access to these clinical trials. So what are your points between the difference between pharma promoted clinical trials or academic promoted clinical trials? Could we work hand together, or could we influence together?
Well,
What is your view on that?
I think that it's the absolute future and it's a must. And as probably you know, that's also, I think, in kind of like a political direction that the European Commission is trying to aim. And we as a pharma company, we have always been working with academia as well. I mean, we don't run the trials. The academics run the trials. They are the investigators, although the kind of like administrative burden that usually are required by pharma companies are even greater, I believe, than those of academic trials. And I think these two need to be linked together, because we want in the end to generate the same level of quality of evidence to support the benefit or also the lack of benefit of a drug. Yeah. I think that needs to be the absolute aim to kind of like work, as you say, hand in hand, according to very similar standards, and these should be combined. Yeah.
There is also an influence of the geographic area or the size of the country or the number of centers in a country in terms of access to a clinical trial or to clinical trials in the country. And maybe smaller countries are not clearly in the same level at bigger country because just of the number of patients that could be subject for a clinical trial, and this is quite unjust, I would say. And how cross-border access to clinical trials could help on this unfair situation.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, we kind of like when selecting, which trial centers to go for, of course, we go with expertise. And that is not even between countries, but also within a country, not locate or let's say distributed evenly. So even if we would select, let's say, a clinic in France, because there is this specific expertise and also there are sufficient numbers of patients are seen, and also the diagnostic possibilities are at a particular center for targeted medicines. We're looking at really, let's say, high tech kind of like support that is needed. So I think it's really important in these situations to somehow motivate cross-border access to clinical trial. That, for example, a patient that is then even if it's bordering neighbor next to the border, let's say in Spain, could participate in a trial in France, where the academic expertise is located together with the diagnostic expertise which is needed for these targeted medicine developments and trials.
So we discussed about the situation where we can choose for this cross-border access, but for example, we had the recent situation of forced cross-border access
Yeah.
of care to patients, for example, with the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
And so could you give us your views on this experience and how also it could impact the future and the perspective on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important to kind of, I mean, obviously Ukraine is outside of the European Union, but still it's a country in need and it's an important country within Europe. So as the Ukraine war started, um, there were a lot of consideration how this will impact clinical trials, which were ongoing at the time, and how patients who have already been kind of like participating in a trial who've now, for example, been shifted to Poland, but maybe the trial was not running there, how they could continue to take part in this trial, because you can, I mean, that's totally unethical to just say, oh, a war has started and we just take you off the trial. So I believe really the industry has taken, at least my company, I can tell you, has taken a lot of effort to support these patients and find case by case solutions for them to continue in a study. But it would be that also showed that it would be very important to have a more harmonized approach to such cross-border access situations if it's just because of obviously a crisis, such as also the COVID crisis or so, or just in general in day-to-day living. So I think the aim is, and that's also the aim of an initiative that I'm participating, this UXCT initiative, is to raise awareness of the lack of, let's say, this framework to participate in cross-border trials and to find a way to make this easier possible for patients to find studies and also to participate, because they're beyond these regulatory and ethical approval topics that I discussed. Of course, there are also questions of who's going to pay for what in terms of healthcare system related to this, and how is, for example, a pediatric patient supported by his family. A small child can't travel to another country by itself. So how these things are being taken care of, I think they're all important issues. And if you're talking about Europe and equality and access to health care, clinical trials should certainly be part of it.
Maybe to finish, what are your perspectives right now? What would you share with us as a global objective for the next year in terms of helping to access easier access to clinical trial for patients?
Well, thank you for this question. I mean, obviously, that's something we're working on, and we're trying to put together the current expertise. And we have to note that in some countries, for example, in Scandinavian countries, there is already sort of, let's say, more of a rule and also a little bit of a legal framework for this participation in cross-border access to clinical trials, for example, for children. And we really would hope that this could also be facilitated across Europe. And of course, that's a little bit aspirational. I think it would be, in years to come. Unfortunately, not now, because of course we've got legal kind of like considerations to take into account here. It would be fantastic to have, one clinical trial application for Europe, because that would then easily make it available, or the drug trials available for any patients across Europe, independent of location.
Perfect. So many thanks, Maren, to have shared all this sharing, shared all your ideas and views and experience on this topic. And I hope to see you soon on our channel, of course.
Of course, and also, lots of success with the initiative. I think it's really, really important, and as I really feel that is something I want to put my heart into. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.